Hi, everyone. Thank you for viewing our presentation, What OER Authors Want, Lessons from an OER Publishing Platform User Survey. I'm Lauren Ray, Open Education Librarian at the University of Washington Libraries, and I use she, her pronouns. Right now, I'm joining you from Duwamish land in Seattle, Washington.
And I'm Melanie Smith. I live and work on the traditional and unceded lands of the Ramaytush Ohlone. As a librarian here at San Francisco State University, I use she, her pronouns, and until this summer, I was Lauren's graduate assistant.
So we're going to talk about a project we undertook to help assess the needs of OER authors using our UW Libraries Pressbooks platform. So here's what we'll cover today. We're going to go over a little bit of background, talk about survey development, what we found in the survey, some changes that we made based on the survey findings. We'll talk about Pressbooks management and sustainability on our platform, and then we'll have a little bit of time at the end for tips on assessing your own institution's OER publishing platform. So a little bit of background and context. So the University of Washington is a large public research university. We're a multi-campus institution in our Seattle, Tacoma, and Bothell, Washington. Plus we have a world-class academic medical center. We have about 54,000 students and over 5,000 faculty, more than 600 degree options across 300 programs. And we have 11 libraries on the Seattle campus, plus libraries on our Tacoma and Bothell campus, as well as at Friday Harbor. So a little bit about the UW Libraries and OER. So the UW focused its commitment to OER in 2018 with the creation of my position. I am the one full-time OER librarian, and I also am fortunate to have funding to support a 14-hour-a-week graduate student assistant. There's been strong faculty interest on our campus in OER publishing, so I focused a lot of my efforts on supporting authorship, primarily through our Pressbooks platform. We have kind of a DIY model, providing the platform and support via consultations and workshops. I have librarian colleagues on our Seattle and Bothell campuses who also support OER and Pressbooks administration on their campuses. Since 2018, we've provided Pressbooks to our university community. I offer workshops on Pressbooks and provide consultations to faculty who want to use the platform to author OER or to support open pedagogy projects. Support for student-authored works has been a substantial offering that I've provided throughout the last few years. So here's our Pressbooks homepage at uw.pressbooks.pub. And here's our Pressbooks catalog, which includes 17 OER titles that have been made public. These are works that are familiar to us, where we've worked with faculty and students to guide them to publication. So a little bit about where we began. At the end of 2021, we realized we had close to 1,000 users on our Pressbooks network with over 400 books, 39 of which were public. And while I was familiar with many of the published projects on the platform, there were others that weren't really known to me, and many users who I could see were active on the platform who were also not familiar to me. We felt it was time to get a sense of who these users were and what they were doing in Pressbooks. So now I'm going to hand it back over to Melanie.
Thank you. So I'll just talk briefly about kind of the process of how we figured out what we were going to do once we decided we needed to do it. To start with, UW Libraries is fortunate to have a dedicated assessment team, and we had several meetings right from the start with Jackie Bellinger, the Director of Assessment and Planning, and Maggie Faber, the Assessment and Data Visualization Librarian. And they helped kind of talk us through our goals and our scope for this project, some methods we could use, and then details of our survey analysis and the survey design as we went along. One really, really helpful tool that we worked with was their guide to undertaking successful assessments. And that sort of walked us step by step through what sort of questions we wanted to answer and why, what kind of information we'd need to answer those questions, what sort of existing information we could draw upon, and then how we were going to use our findings. So one of our recommendations to you, if you're thinking about doing a project like this, is to kind of think about those things yourself, even if we don't have that exact guide to work with. Um, so there were some things we already knew just as we were getting started. We had a few sort of rich sources of data that you can see on the next slide here. One was a Google form that was filled out by new users when they registered for the UW Libraries Pressbooks Network starting in June 2020. Another was the publishing platform itself. As an administrator, Lauren could see each person's first login and their latest activity, how many books they'd created, their roles and permissions, and so on. And then we combined these data with information from the university's enterprise data warehouse as we were working to learn more about our users. Okay, here's what we decided we wanted to know. These were our primary goals for this assessment. Who are the people creating books in UW Libraries Pressbooks, and how did they first learn about the platform? What sort of tools had they taken advantage of, and what support did they still need? What was motivating them to use Pressbooks, and what were the impacts of their published books? And what barriers were keeping them from finishing their projects if they were getting stuck along the way? Once we had our questions, we had to choose sort of a method. And initially, we envisioned hosting focus groups and follow-up interviews and getting really up close and personal with our user network. Instead, once we'd crunched the registration and usage data from Pressbooks and sort of had a better sense of the scale of our network, we opted to follow our initial data work with a survey that we just sent to all registered users. The goal there was to quickly reach a swath of people from different campuses and disciplines, and then just get right into trying out new outreach programs and bolstering support where our survey showed it was needed. We realized that 2 years into this pandemic, a lot of folks are already dealing with survey fatigue. But at the same time, our topic felt well contained and well targeted. So it looked like a good candidate for this sort of project. We had Qualtrics available to us through the university, and that gave us a powerful purpose-built survey platform. That made it really simple for us to connect net IDs to responses and easily send email reminders to those who hadn't finished the survey yet. Honestly, though, if we didn't have Qualtrics as something that was already there at the university, we could have done pretty much the same thing with a free platform like Google Forms with just a little extra effort. The time-consuming step for us was really defining and developing our questions as we went along. When it came down to it, our final set of questions covered the topics that are listed here: folks' reasons for using Pressbooks, support resources they had used or would like to have, comfort with the platform, specific challenges, Pressbooks-related programs they might attend, and what they wanted to achieve with their publication. As you can see, we used a few different question types to target the specific information we were hoping to gather. Multiple choice questions, short answer, top 3, and even a 5-point Likert scale in one case. Our primary focus kind of all along the way, and really Lauren's primary focus in general, is the support needs of OER lead authors who tend to be faculty or staff. But at the same time, many of the folks registered in our network were students, including a lot of undergraduates who'd contributed to these open pedagogy projects that Lauren's been supporting over the years. So we built a separate, shorter survey flow with just 3 questions instead of the full 8 questions for any participants who identified themselves as current undergraduates, just to avoid burdening them with things that weren't really important to them. Thinking about those individual questions, we were considering accessibility pretty carefully in terms of not just folks using like screen readers and assistive technologies, but also different device types. Are they looking at this on a full computer screen or a little mobile phone, and how will that affect the way they interact with it? That affected how we selected formats, opting more for multiple choice and multiple select, rather than this ranking question we really wanted to do that required a drag and drop gesture that just isn't accessible for everybody. We kept an eye on Qualtrics' sort of built-in accessibility checks, but also drew on what we already knew about accessibility from supporting other OER publishing projects. It was hard, but we resisted the urge to ask a whole lot of open-ended questions, just so we could kind of minimize how much we were asking of our participants who were already doing us a favor by filling out the survey. And we chose to ask those folks to self-report their campus and their department affiliations instead of relying on our outside sources of data. Just really out of respect for the participants' privacy, we ended up dropping a follow-up question about whether they wanted a librarian to reach out with personalized support for their project, mainly because we were planning to strip all personally identifying information, including their email addresses, from the responses once we downloaded them. And finally, we asked several colleagues to go ahead and critique our survey along the way and test a draft version right before we sent it out, looking for stumbling blocks in the question language or errors in the branching mechanism that we built into it. And at that point, it was finally time to send it out.
Okay, so what did we find? So out of the 1,043 surveys distributed and minus 76 email bounces, we ultimately received 43 responses that we could count as valid. And that was after removing duplicates and folks who didn't fully complete the survey. This was a very small response rate, but it did give us actionable information we could use. The breakdown of responses was 22 faculty, 12 staff, 3 library staff, and 5 students. We had that distributed across our 3 campuses. And the survey was open for 6 weeks with 2 rounds of reminders, including emails sent directly to those who hadn't finished the survey and special follow-up messages to those who identified as students, faculty, and unknown status. In addition to sending direct reminders to all the email addresses in our survey, we sent encouraging emails via our Pressbooks email newsletter and subject liaison librarians, encouraging people to take a look at the survey. As a Pressbooks network administrator, I could also match the survey responses to their user data in the platform to see that out of our 43 valid survey respondents, 30 had logged in within a year, 34 had a role in at least 1 book, and 18 had been on Pressbooks for over 2 years. So in terms of our themes, I'm going to talk about some of the responses from the survey. In terms of motivation for using Pressbooks, respondents were primarily motivated to use Pressbooks as a teaching tool, which is wonderful to hear because that's how we intended it to be used. The write-in comments also pointed to its use as an educational and teaching resource. We also wanted to know what resources and services users had taken advantage of. Most respondents had attended a training on Pressbooks and consultations with a UW librarian, and use of the H5P plugin was ranked higher, and it's being used by respondents. And things like book cloning, using Hypothesis, and getting help from outside the university ranked lower. When we asked what kind of support would you like to have for your Pressbooks project, respondents rated support in making their project accessible highest, which was very interesting to us, followed by training on interactive activities, book design, and copyright. And then asking about what people hoped the impact of their project would be. These were again focused around teaching, pedagogy, benefits to students like course materials, affordability, and open pedagogy. Comments at the end of the survey told us that people wanted Pressbooks availability and support to continue. And one person pointed out that there was sort of uncertainty about whether people really knew how to maximize its functionality in the classroom, which was something we could do something with. Some other themes from the survey. So survey respondents also overwhelmingly pointed to a lack of time as their main barrier to better using Pressbooks or being able to continue the project that they were working on. Respondents desired specialized workshops on things like how to use Pressbooks better in teaching, how to use Pressbooks to reduce course material cost, and how to improve the accessibility of their books. The focus on Pressbooks as a teaching tool, I think, helped for us to point to the fact that our promotion of it as a teaching tool was working, so that was nice. We asked about interest in a Pressbooks user group for the university, and respondents noted a strong preference for quarterly rather than monthly user groups, not surprising because of Zoom fatigue, and that mentioned lack of time. Also, there was a strong desire for workshops tailored to their specific research area or department. We also saw in the survey a very strong interest in Pressbooks Results, which is a somewhat newer tool that allows you to integrate H5P activities into your learning management systems, grading system. So for us, that would be Canvas. And overall, just lots of love for Pressbooks and a desire to see it continue. So what did it not tell us? So while we were able to match some of the net IDs of our Pressbooks user list with campus data, there were still many users for whom we were unable to clarify their status as faculty, staff, student, as well as which department they came from. This made it challenging for us to get a holistic view of which departments were and were not using Pressbooks. We did get see a few schools and departments that were represented higher, with both faculty and support staff responding to the survey. I think this pointed out that there are departments on campus where we have a strong instructional design help and people are better able to make use of the platform. And also UW is a really big school, and I think this pointed out that there's a really varying department-specific instructional support across campus. Our survey didn't ask specific questions about people's level of awareness or understanding of open educational resources, as we were focused really specifically on the platform itself. In reflecting later, we realized we may have missed the opportunity to ask about whether Pressbooks authors would desire peer review support on their projects, and we didn't ask about authors' feelings about how they made the decision to choose to make their works publicly available, password protected, or their feelings around having their work added to our featured titles catalog or not. So that was a potential missed question that we could have asked. Overall, though, I think we set realistic expectations for ourselves and understood that we were committed to keeping the survey process small. We knew that the survey project wasn't going to tell us everything we needed to know about our OER program, but to give us leads on areas of needed support and potential outreach. In the future, in terms of the survey itself, we recognize that doing more pre-outreach and marketing to promote the survey could potentially help increase participation. So I'm going to talk a little bit about program changes based on the survey. We were really excited that the survey provided actionable ideas for ways that we could better support our authors. While it's only been a few months since we finished summarizing the data, I've made headway on a few things based on what we learned. So we sent a follow-up email to everyone on our network with FAQs that responded to some specific questions and concerns that came up from respondents in the survey, such as whether we'd continue Pressbooks, yes, and how to get an ISBN and how to integrate Pressbooks into UW Canvas. I'm working now on expanding guidance that we have on our OER LibGuide to answer questions about local support. While we don't provide services to proofread, translate, copy edit, or work on things like book design, we can provide some robust suggestions for how authors can utilize sources both inside and outside the university to do so. I've started this summer holding shorter drop-in online workshop offerings on Pressbooks features like H5P and Hypothesis, and I've already seen higher attendance, so that's really encouraging. And Melanie and I had the chance to work with colleagues on expanding the guidance we were providing to authors about how to make their Pressbooks books more accessible. We're doing that in collaboration with another librarian at our institution who supports UW Manifold, another open publishing platform. I'm currently working with another colleague to see how we can pursue funding to pilot Pressbooks results. And in addition to these, I'm thinking through ways we could improve outreach to departments that aren't yet utilizing Pressbooks. This year, I have the opportunity to work with our university's Center for Teaching and Learning to offer a series of OER workshops that will hopefully draw a broader audience and improve partnerships to support OER. So a little bit about Pressbooks management and sustainability. One thing our survey obviously did highlight, based on the low response rate, was the need to clean up our network so that no longer active users could be removed from the platform. We understand that many of those 1,000 plus users on the network have likely moved on, graduated, left the university, or perhaps they've attended a workshop as part of a class, so they kind of learned about Pressbooks briefly, but never really made use of the platform. So based on this, I've been looking at developing a process that we can implement twice a year for removing those that are no longer active from the network. I was fortunate to connect with Stephen Wilfjord, then Open Library Coordinator at eCampus Ontario, via a Pressbooks Network Managers meeting to get advice on how they were approaching this topic. We'll be taking from his advice and starting a process by which we email all users who haven't been active in the last year to check in and see if they still want to remain on the platform. If we don't get a response, they'll be removed after a second reminder. And then books without an owner will be transferred to a network admin. This is definitely a work in progress, and I'd be happy to talk with other Pressbooks network admins about how they're handling the long-term management and sustainability of their platform.
So at this point, we just wanted to sort of pass along what we learned in a way that might be really useful to those of you who are looking to implement an assessment of OER publishing at your own institution. what you see here is just some of the questions we asked ourselves and found really valuable throughout this process. And you might find them valuable too. Thinking about what do you really want to know about your OER authors? Keeping in mind what's actually actionable, what can you do something with, as opposed to just what would be really interesting to know. Um, like I said, we had to resist certain questions just to focusing on what could really make a difference for this publishing program. Um, how does the assessment you're planning align with your library's strategic goals? And maybe you have a specific OER strategic plan that you're working with. How can you think about focusing on the things that are important there to help with buy-in and also just the usefulness of this project for you? What sort of information do you already have, and how can you make use of that in this process? Both at the beginning as you're sort of formulating your questions and working with your assessment plan, and also at the end as you combine what you've learned with information that you had before. Where can you find support and resources within your institution? Even though many libraries aren't big enough to have a full assessment team, or maybe even a single person dedicated to assessment, you may already know where to find expertise or advice or folks who are just ready to collaborate on something like this and can help you out a little bit here and there. It's also really helpful to think about right from the start, how are you going to communicate out your results when you get to the end? And realistically, what sort of changes can you think about making to your program based on what you learn? It's something to think about at the beginning and also all the way along the way.
So to conclude, we wanted to share that we've made an openly licensed copy of our survey instrument available for you to use. So that has all the questions that we asked on the survey, and we'll link that with the presentation. We wanted to thank you so much again for viewing our presentation, and hopefully we'll have some time to chat when this is live. So thank you again. Thanks so much for attending.
Thank you.
Thanks.